7 biblical signs. God is awakening your spirit. There are moments in life when something inside you begins to change, even before anything around you does. Your routines may remain the same. Your responsibilities continue. Your daily life looks familiar on the surface, yet internally there is a quiet shift taking place. A growing sense that you are becoming more aware of yourself, your choices, and the direction your life is taking. This change is not always dramatic. It rarely arrives with sudden clarity or overwhelming emotion. More often it begins subtly. You start noticing things that once passed unnoticed. You begin asking questions that once seemed unnecessary. You feel a deeper sensitivity to your own thoughts, your relationships, and your priorities. At first, this awareness can feel confusing. You may wonder why certain habits no longer feel comfortable. You may question why your attention is drawn toward reflection instead of distraction. You may feel a quiet dissatisfaction with patterns that once seemed normal. It may even feel as though something within you is waking up, slowly but persistently. Scripture often describes this process as the awakening of the spirit. Spiritual awakening does not mean becoming perfect. It does not mean having all the answers. It means becoming attentive. It means developing the ability to recognize when life is inviting you to grow, to change, and to live with greater intention. Throughout the Bible, awakening begins with awareness. People begin seeing their lives differently. They become more sensitive to truth. They recognize patterns that need adjustment. They realize that growth requires participation, not passivity. This awareness marks the beginning of transformation. Psychologically, awakening reflects increased consciousness. The mind becomes less satisfied with automatic living. It seeks clarity instead of comfort. It becomes willing to examine behavior, reconsider priorities, and accept responsibility for change. What once felt routine begins to feel meaningful. Spiritually, awakening is an invitation. God does not force transformation. He draws attention. He gently exposes areas that need growth. He creates moments of reflection that encourage deeper understanding. The awakening of the spirit begins when a person becomes willing to listen to that quiet invitation. In this message, we will explore 7 biblical signs that may indicate God is awakening your spirit. These signs are not meant to create pressure or fear. They are meant to help you recognize when something meaningful is unfolding within your life. Because awakening is not the end of the journey, it is the moment when the journey truly begins. The first sign that God may be awakening your spirit is this: you begin to feel a growing sensitivity to your inner life. There was a time when much of your attention was directed outward. You focused on responsibilities, expectations, and daily demands. Your energy was invested in managing tasks, solving problems, and keeping life moving forward. There was little space to pause and examine what was happening within you. Life felt driven by routine rather than reflection. But then something begins to shift. You start noticing your thoughts more clearly. You become aware of your emotions in ways you did not before. Reactions that once felt automatic now invite reflection. You begin asking yourself questions about why you feel a certain way, why you respond as you do, and whether your actions truly align with your values. At first, this awareness can feel unfamiliar. You may find yourself more thoughtful than usual. You may notice moments of silence becoming more meaningful. You may feel less interested in rushing through life and more interested in understanding it. What once felt like simple routine begins to feel like something worth examining. Scripture often connects spiritual awakening with self-awareness. Throughout the Bible, transformation begins when a person becomes attentive to their inner condition. They start recognizing patterns of thought, habits of behavior, and motivations of the heart. This awareness does not appear suddenly. It grows gradually as the person becomes more receptive to truth. Psychologically, this shift reflects emotional maturity. A person who becomes aware of their inner life develops the ability to pause before reacting. They begin observing their own responses instead of simply repeating them. This awareness creates space for better decisions, stronger relationships, and more intentional living. Spiritually, this growing sensitivity is a sign of life. A spirit that is awakening becomes attentive. It notices when actions feel misaligned. It recognizes when attitudes need adjustment. It becomes more responsive to guidance and more willing to change. What once felt invisible becomes visible. Over time, this awareness begins to reshape daily behavior. You may find yourself reflecting before speaking. You may notice when impatience begins to rise. You may become more attentive to how your choices affect others. These small observations create stability because they allow you to respond with intention rather than impulse. Many people later realize that this stage marked the beginning of their spiritual growth. It was not a dramatic event. It was a quiet increase in awareness. It was the moment when they began paying attention to what was happening inside them, not just around them. When you begin feeling a growing sensitivity to your inner life, it is often not because life has become more complicated. It is because your spirit is becoming more awake. And through that awareness, God may be gently inviting you to live with greater clarity and intention. The second sign that God may be awakening your spirit is this. You begin to feel a deeper awareness of your need for change, even in areas you once defended. There was a time when certain behaviors felt justified. You explained them easily. You defended your reactions. You believed your choices were reasonable because they made sense in the moment. When tension appeared in relationships or setbacks occurred in life, it felt natural to focus on external causes. The problem seemed to exist outside of you. But then, something begins to shift. You start noticing patterns that are difficult to ignore. You may recognize how certain responses lead to the same outcomes. You may see how repeated habits create repeated frustrations. Situations that once felt unfair begin to feel familiar. Instead of asking only what others did wrong, you begin asking what you can do differently. At first, this awareness can feel humbling. You may realize that change is necessary in places you once protected. You may notice attitudes that need adjustment. You may recognize behaviors that require discipline. This realization does not feel comfortable, but it feels honest. Scripture often shows that awakening begins with humility. Throughout the Bible, transformation starts when individuals acknowledge their need for change. They stop defending every action. They become willing to examine themselves. This willingness opens the door for growth because it replaces resistance with responsibility. Psychologically, this shift reflects increased self-honesty. When people become more aware of their role in their circumstances, they gain the ability to change direction. They stop repeating the same patterns automatically. They begin making decisions with greater intention. This awareness creates momentum because it transforms frustration into action. Spiritually, this moment is powerful. God often awakens the spirit by revealing the truth gently but clearly. He does not expose weaknesses to shame a person. He reveals them to prepare a person. He invites growth by showing where growth is needed. Over time, this awareness begins to reshape how you approach life. You become more open to feedback. You become more willing to admit mistakes. You begin adjusting your behavior instead of defending it. This shift creates stability because it allows progress to happen consistently. Many people later recognize that this stage marked the turning point in their spiritual journey. It was the moment when they stopped resisting change and started participating in it. It was the moment when honesty replaced denial and responsibility replaced defensiveness. When you begin feeling a deeper awareness of your need for change, it is often not because you have failed. It is because your spirit is becoming more receptive. And through that growing honesty, God may be gently awakening your spirit to become stronger, wiser, and more aligned with the life you are meant to live. The third sign that God may be awakening your spirit is this: you begin to feel less satisfied with living on autopilot. There was a time when routine felt comfortable. You moved through the day, following familiar patterns. You handled responsibilities, solved problems, and completed tasks without much reflection. Life felt manageable as long as everything stayed predictable. There was little reason to question whether your habits truly supported your growth. But then something begins to change. You start noticing how automatic your life has become. You may catch yourself repeating the same schedule, the same conversations, the same decisions, not because they are intentional, but because they are familiar. What once felt efficient now begins to feel mechanical. You realize that you are functioning, but not necessarily growing. At first, this awareness can feel unsettling. You may wonder why routine suddenly feels empty. You may question whether you are losing motivation. You may even feel frustrated because the structure that once provided stability now feels limiting. Yet, the discomfort continues. Scripture often connects awakening with intentional living. Throughout the Bible, growth begins when a person becomes conscious of their choices. They stop drifting through life and start paying attention to direction. They begin asking whether their daily actions reflect their deeper values. Psychologically, this shift reflects increased awareness. When people live on autopilot, decisions are guided by habit rather than purpose. But when awareness grows, the mind becomes more attentive. It starts questioning patterns that once seemed normal. It begins looking for meaning instead of simply maintaining routine. Spiritually, this discomfort can be a sign of awakening. God often awakens the spirit by interrupting automatic living. He creates moments of reflection that encourage people to evaluate how they are spending their time, energy, and attention. He invites them to move from habit into intention. Over time, this awareness changes how you approach daily life. You begin making decisions more thoughtfully. You become more attentive to how your actions align with your values. You start choosing purpose over convenience. Small routines become opportunities for growth instead of repetition. This shift does not require dramatic change. It begins with attention. Instead of rushing through the day, you pause. Instead of reacting automatically, you reflect. Instead of repeating patterns without question, you begin evaluating them. These small adjustments create momentum because they replace passivity with intention. Many people later realize that this stage marked the moment when their life began to feel meaningful again. It was not because their circumstances changed. It was because their awareness changed. When you begin feeling less satisfied with living on autopilot, it is often not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something within you is waking up. And through that growing awareness, God may be gently inviting you to live with purpose rather than routine. The fourth sign that God may be awakening your spirit is this: you begin to feel a stronger desire to understand truth, not just hear information. There was a time when learning felt simple. You listened to advice, absorbed ideas, and accepted explanations without much reflection. Information was easy to collect. It filled your mind, but it did not always change your life. You heard many things, but you did not always examine them deeply. But then something begins to shift. You start feeling less satisfied with surface-level answers. You may notice yourself questioning ideas more carefully. You may feel a growing need to understand why something is true, not just what is being said. Teachings that once felt sufficient now invite deeper reflection. You begin searching for clarity rather than convenience. At first, this desire can feel demanding. You may feel less comfortable accepting simple explanations. You may spend more time thinking, reflecting, and evaluating what you hear. You may become more selective about the voices you listen to. This shift requires effort because understanding truth takes patience. Scripture often connects awakening with the pursuit of wisdom. Throughout the Bible, growth begins when individuals move beyond passive listening and begin seeking understanding. They ask questions, they examine their beliefs, they test what they hear against experience and conviction. This process transforms knowledge into wisdom. Psychologically, this shift reflects intellectual maturity. A person who seeks truth becomes more attentive to accuracy and meaning. They become less influenced by emotion alone and more guided by thoughtful reasoning. Instead of accepting ideas automatically, they evaluate them carefully. This habit strengthens judgment and builds confidence in decision-making. Spiritually, this desire for truth is a sign of awakening. God often awakens the spirit by stirring curiosity and discernment. He invites people to move beyond assumptions and seek deeper understanding. He encourages reflection so that belief becomes rooted in conviction rather than habit. Over time, this awareness changes how you approach learning. You begin reading more carefully. You listen more attentively. You reflect before forming conclusions. Information that once passed quickly through your mind now stays longer because you are engaging with it more intentionally. This shift also builds stability. When your understanding deepens, your confidence grows. You become less easily influenced by confusion or pressure. You develop the ability to make decisions based on clarity rather than impulse. Your thinking becomes more grounded. Many people later recognize that this stage marked a turning point in their spiritual development. It was the moment when they stopped collecting information and started seeking wisdom. It was the moment when knowledge began shaping their life, not just filling their mind. When you begin feeling a stronger desire to understand truth, it is often not because life has become more complicated. It is because your spirit is becoming more attentive. And through that growing desire for understanding, God may be gently awakening your spirit to live with clarity and wisdom. The fifth sign that God may be awakening your spirit is this: you begin to feel a growing discomfort with the way you spend your time. There may have been a season when time felt flexible. You moved through the day responding to demands, filling empty moments with distraction, and postponing important decisions because there always seemed to be another opportunity later. Hours passed quickly, but without much reflection. Life continued, and the use of time rarely felt urgent. But then, something begins to shift. You start noticing how your time is being used. You may find yourself reflecting on how many hours are spent on activities that bring little growth. You may begin recognizing how easily days slip by without meaningful progress. Moments that once felt harmless now feel significant because you understand that time shapes the direction of life. At first, this awareness can feel uncomfortable. You may realize that certain habits consume more time than they should. You may notice patterns of delay or distraction that have quietly slowed your progress. You may even feel a sense of regret for opportunities that were postponed or ignored. Yet Scripture often connects awakening with the wise use of time. Throughout the Bible, individuals who grew spiritually learned to treat time as a resource, not an assumption. They became attentive to how each day was used. They recognized that meaningful change requires intentional action, not passive waiting. Psychologically, this shift reflects increased discipline. A person who becomes aware of time develops the ability to prioritize. They begin distinguishing between what is urgent and what is important. They learn to focus attention on tasks that create long-term value rather than short-term comfort. Spiritually, this awareness can be a form of guidance. God often awakens the spirit by helping people recognize the connection between time and purpose. He invites them to see that growth happens through consistent effort. He encourages them to make decisions today that support the future they hope to build. Over time, this realization changes daily behavior. You may begin planning your day more carefully. You may reduce time spent on distractions. You may create space for reflection, learning, and meaningful relationships. Small adjustments in how you use your time begin to produce noticeable results. This shift also creates clarity. When time is used intentionally, life feels more organized. Decisions become easier because priorities are clear. Progress becomes visible because effort is consistent. The sense of direction becomes stronger. Many people later recognize that this stage marked the beginning of real momentum in their life. It was the moment when time stopped feeling endless and started feeling valuable. It was the moment when they realized that every day carries the opportunity to grow. When you begin feeling discomfort with the way you spend your time, it is often not because life has become more demanding. It is because your spirit is becoming more aware. And through that growing awareness, God may be gently awakening your spirit to live each day with greater intention. The sixth sign that God may be awakening your spirit is this: you begin to feel a deeper need for honesty with yourself. There was a time when it was easier to avoid certain truths. You may have explained situations in ways that protected your comfort. You may have minimized mistakes, justified habits, or ignored patterns that were difficult to confront. This was not necessarily intentional deception. It was a natural attempt to maintain stability and avoid discomfort. But then, something begins to change. You start noticing a quiet resistance to self-deception. You may find yourself questioning your own excuses. You may recognize when your explanations are incomplete. You may feel an increasing desire to face reality as it is, even when the truth feels uncomfortable. This shift does not feel forced. It feels necessary. At first, this honesty can feel unsettling. You may realize that certain decisions were not as wise as you believed. You may see how habits you defended have limited your growth. You may recognize attitudes that have influenced relationships in ways you did not intend. These realizations require humility because they invite responsibility. Scripture often connects awakening with truthfulness. Throughout the Bible, transformation begins when individuals become willing to see themselves clearly. They stop hiding behind explanations. They accept responsibility for their actions. This honesty creates the foundation for change because it replaces denial with understanding. Psychologically, this shift reflects emotional maturity. A person who becomes honest with themselves develops clarity. They gain the ability to evaluate their behavior objectively. They stop repeating patterns unconsciously and begin making decisions intentionally. This awareness reduces confusion because it aligns perception with reality. Spiritually, this honesty is a sign of awakening. God often awakens the spirit by revealing truth gently but persistently. He invites people to see themselves without distortion. He encourages self-examination not to create shame, but to create freedom. When truth is accepted, growth becomes possible. Over time, this awareness transforms daily life. You begin admitting mistakes more quickly. You become more open to correction. You evaluate your motives before acting. These habits create stability because they allow progress to happen consistently. This shift also strengthens relationships. When you are honest with yourself, you become more transparent with others. Conversations become clearer. Trust becomes stronger. Conflict becomes easier to resolve because truth replaces defensiveness. Many people later recognize that this stage marked a turning point in their personal development. It was the moment when they stopped avoiding truth and started embracing it. It was the moment when clarity replaced confusion and responsibility replaced denial. When you begin feeling a deeper need for honesty with yourself, it is often not because life has become more difficult. It is because your spirit is becoming more awake. And through that growing honesty, God may be gently awakening your spirit to live with integrity and clarity. The seventh sign that God may be awakening your spirit is this: you begin to feel a growing desire for peace that is deeper than comfort. There may have been a time when peace meant the absence of problems. If circumstances were calm, if relationships were stable, if plans were moving forward, you felt secure. Peace was connected to control. As long as life remained predictable, your mind felt settled. When difficulties appeared, peace disappeared. But then, something begins to change. You start recognizing that comfort and peace are not the same. You may find yourself in challenging situations and still feel a quiet steadiness within. At the same time, you may notice that even comfortable circumstances can feel unsettling if something is misaligned internally. This realization introduces a new understanding of peace, one that is not dependent on external stability. At first, this shift can feel unfamiliar. You may question why certain comforts no longer bring satisfaction. You may notice that avoiding conflict does not create lasting calm. You may begin to value clarity and honesty more than temporary ease. This change reflects a deeper search for stability within yourself. Scripture often describes peace as an internal condition rather than an external situation. Throughout the Bible, individuals discovered peace not by controlling circumstances, but by developing trust and alignment. They learned that true peace grows from confidence in direction, not from the absence of difficulty. This understanding allowed them to remain steady even during uncertainty. Psychologically, this shift reflects emotional resilience. A person who seeks deeper peace becomes less reactive to temporary stress. They learn to regulate their thoughts and emotions. They develop the ability to remain calm while solving problems. This resilience creates stability because it prevents small challenges from becoming overwhelming. Spiritually, this desire for deeper peace is a sign of awakening. God often awakens the spirit by redefining what peace means. He invites people to look beyond comfort and develop inner stability. He teaches them to value alignment with truth over temporary relief from tension. This shift strengthens character and builds confidence in decision-making. Over time, this awareness changes how you respond to life. You begin addressing problems directly instead of avoiding them. You make decisions based on long-term clarity rather than short-term comfort. You become more patient during uncertainty because you trust that growth often requires challenge. This deeper peace also influences relationships. You listen more carefully. You react more thoughtfully. You communicate with greater patience. Instead of seeking to win arguments, you seek to preserve understanding. This approach strengthens trust and reduces unnecessary conflict. Many people later recognize that this stage marked a turning point in their emotional and spiritual maturity. It was the moment when peace stopped depending on circumstances and started depending on alignment. It was the moment when stability became internal rather than external. When you begin feeling a growing desire for peace that is deeper than comfort, it is often not because life has become easier. It is because your spirit is becoming stronger. And through that deeper desire for peace, God may be gently awakening your spirit to live with steadiness, clarity, and quiet confidence.